Friendless. How to find friends as a traditional woman. Attacked by friends I loved by saying I'm not a feminist and judged saying I want kids. Feeling hurt and confused. Well, that's too bad. Really. I'm very sorry to hear that, because the idea that you would be judged for saying that you want kids it's a kind of radical insanity as far as I'm concerned. The first thing I would suspect is that you're probably rather young. I could be wrong about this, but we do everything we can to delude 19, 20, 21-year-old women into thinking that there's something inappropriately patriarchal and subordinate about wanting children. And so many young women are firmly convinced that the last thing they want is to have children. And they're not disabused of that foolish notion by people who should be mentoring them properly. Because the truth of the matter is the vast majority of women start to realize in their late 20s and early 30s that there isn't anything more important to them than having a family. And that's how it should be. And that doesn't mean that their careers aren't important or that career isn't important. It means that family is more important. And if you look at, I think it was the Pew Research Foundation that recently conducted a poll looking at what Americans felt brought the most meaning to their life and what was most important. And I believe it was 76% of respondents indicated that it was family. And family is more important than career. And, I say that as someone who's a very gratifying and meaningful career. I've done many things. I've been a professor and a clinical psychologist and an author and a businessman. And I've been involved in an extraordinary number of high quality career level pursuits, as well as jobs. And I found my fair share of gratification in those because I like to work. I'm an industrious person. But it's certainly the case that for me, my marriage and my kids have been of paramount importance. And that actually becomes more true as I get older and hopefully wiser. And so the first thing you need to do is stop feeling guilty about it. Like, you're in the right. You want to have kids, more power to you. And if people are telling you that, you shouldn't bring kids into a planet like this, or that, you're adding to the carbon footprint of the world, you can invite them politely to step themselves off and allow some space for some new life if they're that concerned about it. It's cruel to speak to women in that manner, as far as I'm concerned, to leap to the conclusion that adding an additional soul to the world is going to be somehow harmful, when the possibility is very high that if you have a child and you raise them carefully, that they're going to have a net positive impact on the world, and that impact could be incalculably large. And so there's no excuse whatsoever except a kind of vicious, self-righteous malevolence that would drive people, and maybe jealousy, that would drive people to insult and belittle a woman who wants to have children. And, the other thing you have to realize is that it's not like you're alone. Every single one of your ancestresses going back 3.5 billion years had children. And that's the way it needs to be and the way it should be. And it's a source of extraordinarily deep meaning in life. Now, if you're going to have children, then you have the responsibility to do it responsibly, and to make it a priority and to treat it as if it's important. But you need to find some new friends, I would say, because these friends aren't your friends if they're belittling your admirable desire to do what everyone who's participated in the process of continuing life has done since the beginning of time. And anyone who's anti-child is confused so deeply that that confusion will definitely cause themselves a tremendous amount of trouble in their own lives. And the only thing that you can hope for people who are that confused is that they sort it out and decide what's important before they're too old to make the right decision. And the right decision is almost inevitably having children. You know, I've met people who haven't, and I would say it's not easy for them to fill the void in their life. And these are often people who've had high-powered careers and have been very successful and admirable people in many regards. But I'll tell you, as you get older, that space that your family should occupy becomes more and more difficult to fill. You need, as a person who's getting older, well, first of all, as a younger person, you need that spark of life and responsibility that having a small child brings to you. You require that. It matures you, because as soon as you have a child, then you're no longer the most important thing in the world. And you're still sadly immature if you're the most important thing in the world. And it's very difficult to get over that without having a child. And then you need that life and responsibility that the child provides, to bring out the best in you, to grow you up and to make you awake and aware, like you might be on behalf of someone who's fragile and needs your support and development. And then as you get older, well, you need to see life continue to manifest itself in the possibility of youth and the adventure that young people go on when they start a family. You need to see that continuity, and it helps ground you in the world and gives you hope for not only for your future, but for the future itself. And so, and then with regards to saying that you're not a feminist, I guess probably what I would recommend there is just stop saying that. All it sounds to me like is that it gets you in trouble. I mean, I think what you mean, given the way that you wrote your question, is that because you have some traditional ideas about family, it's difficult for you to reconcile that with the rhetoric of modern feminism. And that's perfectly understandable, because the one group that modern feminists seem to be particularly antipathetic towards is mothers, which is really quite remarkable achievement given that they're supposed to be on the side of women. But I would say, if you want kids, you talk to people who are positively inclined to your motivation and ambition, and you don't discuss it with people who are inclined to put you down and denigrate that, because they're deceiving themselves, they're acting cruelly, and they're doing no one any favors, least of all themselves, and certainly not you. So you carefully find people who are willing to support you in your desire, and more power to you as far as I'm concerned. So it's a very courageous thing to bring a child into the world, you know, and then it's a very responsible thing to do it properly. And you can't grow up. You won't grow up and take your place in the world properly until you do that. And, you know, it's certainly possible, too, that the people that are attacking you are even unwilling to come to terms with their own internal desires. And that would be my guess. They're denying something that they regard as inappropriately subordinate, as I said, for ideological reasons, that to have a child is to damage the world. That would be one part of it. Or to subordinate yourself to the oppressive patriarchy. That would be another part of it. And that no alert and woke woman would dare to have that as an ambition. But that's so shallow and so superficial, all of that, and so self-damaging, because there isn't that many things that you have to do in life that will sustain you in life in a necessary manner. And having a family is definitely one of those. It's maybe half of your life. It might be more than that, but it's definitely at least half of your life. You figure intimate relationship, that's a big part of your life. Your career and the useful things and productive things that you do outside, that's another part. But fundamentally, it's family. Paula, how do I stop emotional eating? I am prone to addictive behavior. Makes me feel in control. I would appreciate your thoughts on this. Look, Paula, the first thing that I would suggest is that you probably eat because it makes you feel better. I mean, physically. So lots of times I've had clients, this has happened endless numbers of times. I've seen it where people are extremely anxious and nervous and they eat something and they feel way better. And the reason they feel better is because, well, they've either not been eating enough or they're eating wrong. Now, I constantly recommend it to my clients if they were arguing with their spouses. And this is something I could generally recommend to everyone that's out there. If the two of you are involved in a particularly stupid argument, then break and have something to eat. Have some cheese. Have something that's protein and fat heavy, like a snack, and wait 10 minutes and then talk again and see. You might find that you're endlessly more reasonable. And so I would also say, generally speaking, Paula, you should eat a fat and protein heavy breakfast, and a lot of it, probably more than you want, probably more than you would feel comfortable with. It's the most important meal of the day. And it's possible that you're dysregulated psychophysiologically, so that if you get stressed, your body overproduces insulin and takes all the blood sugar out of your blood system. And that makes you anxious and irritable and makes it difficult for you to think. And then if you eat something, and it could be something sweet, although I wouldn't recommend that because it's a bad medium to long-term solution. If you eat something, you probably feel way better, like literally, not psychologically. So the trick there is to eat a big breakfast and then not allow yourself to get hungry during the day. So eat 3 meals, make them a decent size. And if you need to carry a snack or something like that, nuts are really useful, can be really useful if you can tolerate them. Or something like beef jerky, which I think is actually better. So try that. Try eating a big breakfast and then try not letting yourself get hungry and see if that so-called emotional eating decreases. Now, what you could do along with that is see to what degree you can decrease your intake of carbohydrates and sugar, because that may be causing you a lot of trouble. And I would say if you are inclined to eat emotionally, don't eat carbohydrates and sugar, because it'll fix it temporarily, but it'll make it worse like an hour later. So assume a problem with eating habit before you're assuming a psychological problem. So I'm a Silicon Valley founder and find that whatever happens here happens elsewhere fast. What can we do and you do to stop identity politics here? Well, don't play the identity politics game. No diversity initiatives, no inclusivity initiatives, no equity initiatives, no quota, no discussion of systemic racism, none of the tropes that are associated with the radical political left. Because to the degree that you let any of that into your organization, you let it all in. And so hire on the basis of competence, using objective tests, and let the cards fall where they're going to. And don't be afraid to tell people that that's what you're doing. Watch your HR department carefully and make sure that they're not pushing diversity, inclusivity, and equity initiatives, that they're not requiring people to take implicit association tests that hypothetically reveal their unconscious bias, that they're not doing seminars on systemic racism and prejudice, and then they're not making the assumption that unequal outcomes, let's say in terms of hiring in the STEM fields or in terms of employment in the STEM fields, which by the way are radically overestimated unless you gerrymander what constitutes the definition of a STEM discipline. You have to not participate in any of that. And you have to make it known to your peers, who would be other Silicon Valley founders, I would presume, that you're not doing any of that. And so that's the best advice that I have, is don't start playing the game, and really keep an eye on your HR people, because that's their new pathway to unearned power and influence, and not of an appropriate sort. So, you might think as well what your values are. I don't mean in a mission statement sort of way, because I tend to think that that's often casual to the point of virtue signaling, but you need to think through what sort of organization that you want to have and what the principles are going to be, and make those clear as an alternative story to the diversity, inclusivity, and equity rhetoric. So that's what I would recommend. Dan, I habitually procrastinate on important tasks, CV writing, for example, for months on end, waiting for the right time. It is severely holding me back. How to avoid this? Well, I covered that in chapter 4 in 12 Rules for Life, so you could read that. That would help. It's called Compare Yourself to Who You Were Yesterday instead of who someone else is today. Look, if you're procrastinating on your CV writing, then you're biting off more than you can chew. And I would say to some degree, it's a reflection, and I don't mean this in a pejorative way, it's a reflection of a lack of humility. You think you're capable of taking on larger tasks than you actually are. And the proof of that is in what you said. You take on these large tasks and then you don't complete them. So obviously, you're not capable of taking on the large tasks and completing them. So with regards to CV writing, you have to sit down and negotiate with yourself. You have to ask yourself, like, seriously, okay, I need to do something about this CV. I need to at least start it, because obviously you're not going to finish it unless you start it. And then you have to ask yourself, like you're asking someone that you don't know and that you can't negotiate with very well, what you might be willing to do. Like, so if you come to see a behavior therapist and the problem was, well, I can't get started on my CV, the therapist might say, well, why don't you just bring your CV next week and we'll take a look at it. Just bring it in rough form. All you have to do is download it on a disk or email it. And then the person may or may not do that. And if they don't do it, well, then you have to find out. Then you may have to say, okay, well, I noticed you didn't email your CV to me this week. So how about this? How about we make an appointment by phone tomorrow at 10:30, and I'll phone you or you phone me, and you'll be on your computer and you'll go through your files with me, and then you'll email me the CV. Do you think you can do that? And then usually people will manage that, but maybe they come back the next week and they haven't even done that. And so then you say, well, look, next week, why don't you bring your computer or your disk and we'll go through it together and find your CV and bring it up on screen and just take a look at it. Because actually a CV is quite a daunting thing to work on because it's your whole past and your whole future. And so it's a pretty big dragon. The trick is to find a piece of the solution that you would be willing to engage in, that you would actually do. And so, I might also recommend to one of my clients that all they do is go onto their computer and find out which folder their CV is in and open it. Just open the file, open the folder. And then that'd be one day's work, is just go open the folder. And then maybe the next day is, well, drag the file onto your desktop so it's there. And then maybe the next day's job would be just open it. Just open it and just like glance at the first page and then close it. And I know this seems ridiculous because you'd think, well, I'm an adult and I should be able to do more than that. And maybe you can, but it sounds like you can't. So you have to start where you can start. And I also recommend to my clients that once they make themselves a deal about what they're going to do, they stick to it. So if the deal is, well, I'm just going to drag the file with my CV in it onto my desktop, and that's today's task, I'm not going to start working on it. Because once you make a deal with yourself, especially with regards to something you're afraid of and you're avoiding, if you push yourself farther than what you've negotiated with yourself honestly, then you'll find that you won't get back to the work because you don't trust your negotiating abilities anymore. You don't trust yourself. So if the deal is you drag the file onto the desktop and that's today's job, and that's a lot better because it's more than you've done for 2 months, then you give yourself a pat in the back and you say, look, good enough, man. Like, it's no big act of heroism that I can go out and shout about in the street, but I'm farther ahead than I was. And then, well, then maybe the next day's task is, well, read it. Just read it. Just familiarize yourself with it again. Close it. Good enough. Then you can think that night, well, where are the holes? What needs to be updated? Then the next thing might be to say, well, here's a list of 20 things that might need to be done with this CV. And, they don't all have to be that accurate, but you might have some sense of what needs to be updated, where the holes are and, where it ends and what you'd have to do to get the information necessary to update it. And that's a good time to talk to someone else about it too. And then you can rank order those 20 things in terms of the probability that you'll do them the same way. Break them down into small subtasks. And maybe you can only work on it for 10 minutes a day because it stresses you out so badly. God only knows what's hiding behind your fear of your CV. You might be embarrassed about your past accomplishments. You might be unwilling to do the work because your CV hasn't been updated for a long period of time. There might be holes in your CV that you don't know how to account for. Reading your CV might make you realize that you're in the wrong job. It might bring up the specter of having to look for new employment. A CV is a real monster because it's a record of your life and a guide to your future ambitions. So if you happen to be afraid of it, well, you should take it seriously. It's not just a piece of paper. It's a real dragon. And so then you face it to the degree that you can face it, and you break it down to steps. You break down the steps that are necessary until they're so small that even someone as avoidant as you is likely to make progress. And then you find your natural speed of advancement, and perhaps over a month you can put your CV together, and then congratulations to you, because it's a hard thing. And you'll find too that a lot of fears are associated with that, like, oh no, now if I finish this, I'm going to have to send it out. And if I'm going to send it out, I'm going to have to look for another job. And if I'm going to look for another job, I'm going to have to move. And who knows what that'll do to my relationship? And who knows if anybody wants to hire me? And God only knows if I'll be successful in my new career. And so there can be a tremendous number of subordinate fears associated with something as simple as, oh, I need to update my CV, which is a really easy thing to say, but a very difficult thing to do. So I would say have a little bit of compassion for yourself, like not enough so that it stops you from moving forward or gives you an excuse, but do decompose the problem into small elements that you can handle, and be humble enough not to be too irritated at yourself when you find out just how small those pieces have to be in order for you to successfully master them. And I think that's where I'm going to stop, guys. I'm out of intelligent things to say, I would say, and starting to get somewhat tired. And there's a lot of extremely sophisticated and complicated questions here that I'd like to continue answering, but not today. And so thank you very much for tuning in. If you're in London, UK, you might think about coming to my talk at the Apollo on May 8th. I'm going to be at Oxford around then too. And I don't know if I'll be giving a talk then. That's still in negotiation, but I'll definitely be at the Apollo. As I said, my paperback is coming out in the UK in early May. So that's exciting. I'm signing a bunch of front pages for the paperback. We're still planning a European tour in September. That'll be announced relatively soon if we can get all the details straight. And I'll see those of you who are coming to see me in New York. I'll see you in April, and also at the Slavoj Žižek debate in Toronto on the 19th. And so thank you very much for your continued support and for tuning into the Q&A. And it was a pleasure to answer your questions and have the opportunity to talk about serious issues in a careful and thoughtful manner with all of you. So, good night.